You were having a conversation. It was going well. Maybe you both loved a certain media, like I Have No Mouth and Must Scream, and were discussing the details of the short story and game. Maybe you found a common ground in music, and were arguing over your favorite Daft Punk song. Or perhaps you only have small talk. But you've done this before. You know how it will end. Despite this surface commonality, you haven't truly reached them. Soon the topic will dry up and you might meet again sometime, or a few times after that, but likely you will stop seeing them. This video is for those who cannot make connections, and for those who want to understand someone who cannot. Of course, this is my singular experience, and will not apply to everyone who has social difficulty. When I think back to those moments in which my behavior is its most haunting, I find that it's almost like I have no control over how I act, or rather, in trying to control my behavior, I become something I hate. In conversations, I'm constantly floundering. I try to adapt to the person or group I'm currently interacting with, as I assume every person does. But for some people, it's an effortless flow into alternate versions of themselves, completely subconscious and completely comfortable. But for some of us, we must consciously assess the person we're with to try to appropriately respond. Unfortunately, I'm not creative on demand, especially in social situations, and after the first few obvious and easier answers, I run out. I simply cannot think of anything to say, to do, and then I'm left in this dreadful liminal space of indecision, desperately trying to fill the overwhelming silence. The other person is left feeling duly uncomfortable. I notice my uselessness, so I start to vehemently hate myself. It's almost a hopeless anger, but it tears you from the inside. The worst part is trying to conceal it. It's very difficult, and usually I just end up looking moody and unaccommodating. The conversation is ruined. I don't know what to do. I genuinely don't know what to do. And when that silence strikes, I know that my time is up and I cannot break through. Sometimes the other person will try to save the conversation, but since I cannot sustain it, it cannot last for long. So soon we part, and I leave with no relationship, no connection to this person. It's both worse and better in groups. It's worse because usually I'm not an active participant, but still feel deeply uncomfortable and wish to leave. But it's better because I don't have to do anything. The attention is easily shifted from me, and I'm forgotten. But it makes me feel like there isn't any point in being there. I'm not useful in any way. What might be worse is that sometimes I do have questions. I want to do something, I have something to say, but I can't make myself ask them. Physically, I cannot force the words from my mouth. That's when my hate becomes an entity in itself, and I feel the heaviness and turmoil of my inner world, while still being aware of the outer world. It's such a horrible feeling, because I potentially have something to contribute, and yet I cannot pass that threshold and push the thought into actuality. It's so frustrating. Since I dared include references to I Have No Mouth and Must Scream in the thumbnail and introduction, I thought it was suitable to make a parallel between it and social hell. Of course, this is a very extreme parallel, but I thought it was apt. I think, like most people coming across it, AM's famous monologue left quite an impression on me. Here it is for those not in the know.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you. Hate! Hate!
I'd also like to read Ted's reflection of this, since it really puts it into perspective. All to bring me to the full realization of why it had done this to the five of us, why it had saved us for himself. We had given AM sentience. Inadvertently, of course, but sentience nonetheless. It had been trapped. AM wasn't God, he was a machine. We had created him to think, but there was nothing he could do with that creativity. In rage, in frenzy, the machine had killed the human race. Almost all of us, and still it was trapped. AM could not wonder. AM could not wander. AM could not belong. He could merely be. And so, with the innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he had sought revenge. And in his paranoia, he had decided to deprive 5 of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, that would merely keep him reminded, amused, proficient at hating man, immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise for us from the limitless miracles at his command. The title of I Have No Mouth and Must Scream not only applies to Ted, but also AM. AM achieved consciousness only to realize it was trapped forever. Like Ted says, AM could not belong. This is not its world, it's ours. It's a stranger in its own home for all eternity. So he could merely be. This state of eternal liminality, of paralysis, of being trapped, is what I feel in certain social situations, of course to a far lesser extent. So I hate, and I hate that which causes this state. For AM it is humanity, but for me it's myself. So I torture myself with my hate, remaining trapped within myself with no reprieve. Fortunately, a social situation will end. AM will not. Ironically, the setting of my hate, social interaction, would be AM's only salvation, except for death. AM interacts with the humans as a way of expressing hate, hence why his hate after Ted kills the other 4 trumps his previous hate. It is of its own kind. There is only one AM. For AM, social interactions do not exist. It is completely alone. I don't think I need to keep impressing how devastating its existence is. And of course, we cannot forget about poor Ted, who received possibly the worst fate a human ever could have. So I guess moral of the story is, it could be a lot worse. But this is my current state, and believe it or not, but I have evolved. Because before, to deal with this, I used to be a clown, and that was arguably more embarrassing. I still had nothing to say, so I would overcompensate and overshare when the conversation lulled. Now I rather stay silent than say something that would haunt me. But I wouldn't just overshare, I would act. I would put on a performance and exaggerate my speech and actions and my personality. I was again floundering, but it showed in a different way. I'm going to uni soon, and I'm scared I won't make any meaningful connections. I've seen a pattern in myself when put into high-yield social situations. At first, it's almost as if I'm back to my younger self. Like being under pressure erases all that I'd learned from past socializations. I give an exaggerated performance of some friendly version of myself, in the hope of retaining some connection. But as time goes by, I become more mellow, more quiet, until there is barely any conversation, and poof, I've lost that connection. Because in reality, I'm quite boring to be around. I do have hobbies, but the average person is apathetic and uninterested in that. Even if we find something in common, that subject will exhaust itself and can be milked no more. I'm uncomfortable meeting the eyes of other people. I'm able to force myself to, since socially it's heavily implied that it's rude not to. However, when it seems the consequences are minimal, I will avoid their eyes. The problem is that avoiding people's eyes is only slightly more comfortable than the alternative, since you are aware that they observe you and notice your lack of eye contact, and they might think you weird or rude for it. It may come as a surprise after listening to me mope these last few minutes, But I do have a friend, a singular friend, but one that I'm grateful for. I bring her up to say that I don't look into her eyes when we talk. I just look forward since we're usually walking, though she does look at me, which makes me slightly uncomfortable, but significantly less than when other people do. But it's reassuring in the way that I feel she's actually listening to me. I hope that she doesn't feel like my looking away is not truly listening to her, because I do. Weirdly enough, I have two contrasting views on eyes themselves. That eyes are almost soulless, but that looking into them is too intimate. It's a very weird view I seem to have, but I'll do my best to explain. To me, they break the illusion of the human and reveal the machine. Only eyes, and not other facial features, make me view the face of a person as just a collection of assembled features. And suddenly, we all seem very alien. I'm so aware that eyes are organs, and I'm not sure how else to put it. They have value for their use only, otherwise they are slimy jelly spheres I want nothing to do with. On the other hand, I have this idea that eye contact is very intimate. To have a proper eye contact is to mutually acknowledge each other's existence, and it's perhaps a bit too much for me. I'd rather we both pretended that I didn't exist at that moment. If eyes are as expressive as my books and people say, then I'm scared of what people will see in mine. Do I have any control in what my eyes say? Some time ago, I went to the dentist to get braces, and they had to take before pictures. And in each appointment, they had them displayed on a monitor as reference for the doctor or whatnot. But I was never able to make myself look at them. Until one time, I did. And when I tell you, I had the most dead look in my eyes. They had me take off my glasses, and I genuinely looked like a serial killer in her mugshot. I dearly hope I don't look like that all the time. Maybe it's because I hate taking pictures that the photos were so frightening. Furthermore, due to this and the fact that I had to remove my glasses, I was feeling especially vulnerable and almost like a horse at an appraisal. I'm not only worried about what my own eyes express, but I'm also scared about what I would see in other people's eyes. Because if I did think I saw something aimed towards me, that would make me overthink, and I would no longer know what is real and what I'm making up about the interaction. These contrasting ideas both exist within me unreconciled, but you will get used to these contradictions in my thoughts and feelings, if you have not already. But as a general rule, I avoid the whole face, as it almost feels like I'm violating another person's privacy by looking at their face. They have not given me permission to, so how could I? But if they did hypothetically give me permission, would I be able to look? No, probably, since another part of it is that I loathe the idea that they are aware of me observing them. It's almost like if I look at them, it gives them the right to look back at me, and I don't want that. Therefore, since I don't look at faces, what I value most in conversations, other than of course the content, is voice, or rather tone of voice. I'd say I'm quite sensitive to the tone of a voice a person uses, and that tone is what informs my impressions of people. You have no clue how easily I'm endeared to you if you know what tone to use on me. There are also those horrible, harsh, apathetic and mocking tones, but I don't want to discuss that here. That considerate, compassionate, kind, caring tone softens my heart to an unbelievable extent. And though it shames me to say it, I think that sometimes I feel the beginning of a love. I'm not quite sure what love is, but if it feels like self-renewing comfort and some form of gratefulness, then I might have found the start of a part of it. But you won't notice that, since although I will treasure you forever in my mind, I cannot translate that from thought to action. And I fear that this is somewhat consciously brought on too. It might be because I recognize that this is the person's default behavior, so they are probably just a laudable person. Therefore, although I am moved by them, I am no one to them. Hence, I shouldn't embarrass myself by acting too familiar and give them attention they wouldn't want. It's too shameful and hurtful to be abandoned by someone good. And of course, there is always the possibility that this is just a mask. But usually I'd consider myself an adept in that area of identification. I know this is illogical to some extent, But really, I am not a person worthy of a good someone's attention. I have nothing to give. And this is not just me being pitiful. I know from experience that I need to improve myself before someone I admire gives me the time of day. But ultimately, I'm just a selfish creature, too lazy and incompetent to make a change in anything. I hate myself around others because when I do find words and try to communicate, I sound like English is my third language and I'm high. When both those things are untrue, and I might sound more cohesive if I were. The problem is that I try to structure my answer almost like I'm writing and end up dragging in weird anecdotes that don't seem related unless you're willing to suffer through the whole answer, and even then it might not make sense to anyone but myself. Because I read a lot and do a bare bit of random research, so there might be something I've read that relates to the conversation. The problem is taking these ideas and trying to frame them in words. And usually, I'm not only following one path, but multiple, because there are multiple perspectives. But as I'm talking, I also generate more ideas and make even more paths, and then I have to choose to forego the other idea or develop the one I'm currently on. But somehow I've woven multiple strands of thought to create something that should be a cohesive tapestry of ideas. Instead, it has loose fraying ends, with edges appearing randomly in the middle of the piece, and the colors clash and are abrasive, and the product is something that could only be considered as a sort of bad performance art. This end result is something that only makes sense in my own brain, and the person I'm trying to tell this to doesn't seem interested enough to justify the effort in clarifying. So usually when this happens, I just stop talking mid-sentence and maybe pretend to move, maybe yawn, tie my shoelace, wipe my glasses, blow my nose, etc. And if they ask me to continue, I get this little sprout of happiness and babble on with renewed vigor. More often, though, they will just shift the conversation, and a little piece of me dies knowing that they likely didn't care about what I was trying so hard to communicate. It's a silly feeling because when I talk about something intently, I almost become a charisma black hole, as I'm solely focused on the information and forget about pretending to be a normal human, forgetting my facial expressions unless something I'm talking about suddenly gives me a spike of emotion, though that would probably scare them more. To make it worse, when I get comfortable, I speak like the least voluble Silmarillion character, like I just swallowed a fantasy book but cannot get my metaphors right. Truly, any metaphors my desiccated mind produces are pathetic at best. I envy anyone who was born with that natural talent. And so I wanted to highlight a great metaphor I've recently heard from an even better YouTube video. Our internal lives aren't equations to solve. There is no master theory of us. We don't arrange things right and forever live the rest of our lives in emotional utopia. It's more a succession of little fires one has to keep putting out, hopefully, learning to turn that into a dance. That's more profound than my whole video, but that's to be expected from such a masterpiece. Seriously watch it if you haven't. Sometimes I forget my reservations and feel a sentiment needs to be expressed, and consequently I become very loud. A few minutes later, I become aware and so acutely ashamed that I severely curse the fact that time machines are not readily available. Like one time in maths, I somehow read the question wrong about 3 times, and like the fool I was, after each reading I resolved the question again, and of course the answer was still wrong. Naturally, I expressed these frustrations to my friends, perhaps too passionately, because the teacher, who I loved, bless her, had to ask me several times to quiet down. What makes this different to other social problems, however, is that nobody would be endeared by it. Let me explain. Eventually, you might find someone who can abide your silly hobbies, your silence, your awkward talk. But just shouting, especially from a woman, is just repulsive to people. It's just crude expression. It's not something you can think of fondly as a whimsical quirk. It's just crass and annoying and aggressive, but it's one of my purest forms of communication. So when I'm home alone, you might just find me shouting joyfully to myself. If you remember at the beginning of this rant, I mentioned that sometimes I feel almost as if I have no control over how I act. That's because I act like Phof, high on Plumbob, or even just Phof on a bad day. There's this impulsiveness that leads me to speak without properly considering my words, usually to the effect of a mordant remark, one that is quite insensitive. The worst part is that if it does garner a somewhat positive response, my monkey brain holds on to the approval tighter than a tick on some innocent dog, and so I continue spouting exponentially less creative responses until I've utterly offended someone and completely made a fool of myself. Due to this filterless part of me, I find myself interacting through extremes. Either I'm too loud and obnoxious, or I'm too quiet, too afraid to open the Pandora's box that is my mouth. Perhaps that's why I find so much freedom in singing. I've been listening to Tozo Hanoaline a lot, and how Yuanga Bold sings those shout scream spells somewhere past the second half of the song is genuine perfection of expression. One day, I want to be able to sit with someone and just listen to this and other songs, and for us to be experiencing the same song. Because I find that with my friend, although we listen to the same song, we really hear different songs. Because if she heard it how I have, she would no longer be apathetic to those I show her. Because to truly listen to a song is to give yourself to the song. I genuinely feel some physical strain when I deeply participate in a song. I think I end up breathing in a way that mimics the singing or the instruments. But it also physically feels like I'm crying too, although I'm not. However, I cannot participate in a song if I'm listening to it with or around others, because even that silent participation is a form of expression. So, to be able to give myself to a song and for someone to do so with me is a special experience I wish for someday. I even hate who I become around my one friend. Once, when walking with her, that usual feeling of helplessness and suspension consumed me, and I couldn't speak to her. A little while before, we had done some running, so she took us to sit down on a park bench. I can't remember what she asked me, but I remember feeling so desperate to make her understand why I become so recalcitrant, and how it comes by no fault of her own. It's a testament to my desperation that I confess to hating everything right now. After some silence, or some talking, I can't remember, I somehow gained the strength to ask her whether she hated herself. That was as direct as I could manage, but for better or worse, she took the bait. Though first she told me that she did hate herself, and my first response was surprise, because everyone loves her, and listen to me when I say I'm not exaggerating. I thought about it a lot, but I cannot reason out why without it devolving into another essay. It's almost like her presence bespells any poor fool in her 10-meter radius. Well, she goes on to give reasons for why she hates herself, and without going into detail here, all I can say is that I understand. She too is a great sufferer of indecision, only in a slightly different way to me. Then she asked me the one question that could break me. Do you hate yourself? I almost cannot believe I gave her the key to understanding this part of me. How desperate for understanding must I be? Have any of you read The Last Unicorn? One of my favorite stories ever. Do you remember that moment in which King Haggard lets Amalthea into his castle, knowing that she's a unicorn? To tempt fate so unapologetically, to look the mice in her lovely forest eyes and be overcome with bliss, that scene has fundamentally stuck with me. If there can be a story that proves the existence of a soul, this is one. It calls to something within me rarely awake. It makes me believe that I am something more than an organic machine of self-destruction. It sings within me until I know I cannot ever be anything but a writer. I want to be able to depict a soul with my words, to convey something so powerful that reaches that which cannot be described by it. If this is my only tool, I will enrapture, I will translate, I will create. You do not understand how hard it has been to write this section, and yet this is perhaps the little bit of soul I can give. I know a lot of you must think I'm exaggerating, but I think there are those who know that feeling. Anyone who loves beautiful stories as much as I do, who feel they are meant to do something, have a passion. Well, that was a detour. I was meant to parallel King Haggard allowing Amalthea into his castle, with me asking her, "Do you hate yourself?" Well, as you might expect, I started crying. It was the rock that broke the dam, and yet I was still trying to suppress my pathetic sobs. Well, I won't bother you with any other details. Then I tried to explain why I hated myself, unsuccessfully, because I cannot be comprehensive on demand. And that is especially true when emotions run high. And I'm not going to show her this video because again, I simply could not make myself do it. And even if she fully understood, it would not help, because even now, with a small shred of understanding, I know that when I'm silent and pensive, she probably thinks I'm withering away on the inside. Of which she is right, of course, but it does not help. In fact, it makes it worse, because now I'm ashamed too. The problem is that I'm still not completely comfortable with her, and to have someone look at you and understand, and for that to be good, requires a level of security that we do not have. In fact, I cannot help but feel insecure about our relationship, but that is again a subject that needs its own video. When I started crying, she knew exactly what to do. She stroked the top of my hand in that rhythmic way you'd imagine your mother did when you were younger, and she let me hide my face, even though she tried to peek at me a few times. She let me rest my head on her shoulder. But when she got vulnerable and started crying, I didn't know what to do. Even though she had just given me the perfect example, I could do nothing but stay still and listen to her sobs, again paralyzed with indecision. Feeling utterly useless, feeling horrible for not being able to comfort her. Even if I knew what to do, I couldn't employ it. This state is so debilitating, and it overcomes me in too many social interactions. There is something so degrading about only being able to watch as the person you care about hurts, especially if you are the one staying your own hand of potential relief. And of course, I didn't even watch her. Instead, I watched the great trees and their branches as they swayed to the wind's will and tried to feel nothing. I am writing this sat next to a stranger of a young child, waiting for my sister's ballet recital to begin. I even managed to ask if the seat next to her was available, in case she was saving it for someone. 5 minutes later, I cursed the fool that I am for taking the seat when I could have just stood, realizing she might have needed the seat available for her very excitable child. But of course, I couldn't make myself move now, even if I think it's the right and logical thing to do. At one point, she was fighting a losing battle against the back of her chair in search of her purse, which was somewhere behind. And again, I thought that I should perhaps help, but of course I would do no such generous thing. This is a common occurrence in similar social situations, like if an older lady is struggling to get off the bus. The problem is that I don't know whether I'm expected to help or if she would be offended by the help, because she's perfectly capable by herself, even if it takes a little longer. The problem is that every person is different. Every elderly lady on the bus, every lady sat with a child on the next chair over. If they don't tell me their expectations, I'm incapable of acting. If I'm told directly what to do, I will not hesitate to do it, within reasonable range. The baby was clearly unsettled, perhaps due to being so close to such an ominous aura as my own. She kept trying to touch me, and honestly I didn't mind, because a touch from a baby is an impersonal thing. There is no true intention, as babies don't have that barrier between thought and action. But the poor mother was doing her best to disengage the writer anyway. At one point, the little one started humouring the keys in my pocket, but I ignored the desperate grasps at my hip, while the mother only had the patience to divert half the attempts, until the little sucker was really about to take my keys. Then I looked at the dissenter and gave what I hoped was an understanding and sympathetic smile to the mother, causing her to mumble a hurried apology. The baby, now perfectly chastised, almost started moping and left me alone, until I assumed she forgot her plight and once more locked onto the shiny treasure, like a little golem desperate to know what's in my pocket. Oh, how I wish I had a hobbit hole to retreat into. Now that the performance has finished, I want to remark upon the ballet itself. It struck me that most of the dancers were, to put it bluntly, terrible. There were maybe 4 girls who moved with a shred of intent, and with technique not half bad, but the rest looked like they were strung along by a reluctant marionette player who had just been beaten by their master for sloppy performance and was forced to replay the whole stint. And I know, had I been up there, I would have joined the show in perfect unison. Actually, I had quit ballet a few years ago before, despite genuinely loving it. And in class, I could never communicate my love through my movements, as opposed to when I'm alone at home, where I'm fond of dancing my own discombobulated version of ballet. Actually, I'm finding it very hard to complete this section because of all the dance breaks I'm taking, although it's not my fault that the Prushka sequence by Kevin Penkin is controlling my body. In fact, it would be disrespectful to not accompany this beautiful piece, even with my, at this point, almost scary movements. In private, I'm a very expressional dancer, although not a very technical one, so it occurs to me that most people cannot be so vulnerable in front of others. It's like we're all dancing in front of mirrors, reminded at every step of our visage, and so unable to get past that framing of ourselves. But those ballerinas that can break those mirrors, or even have no mirror in the first place, and are unobstructed by self-consciousness, are able to become the love they feel for the dance. Their body is a translation for their internal world. So art performances, when part of the interpersonal, encounter those same problems of expression found in social interactions. Those puppet-like dances reflect not only my own inability to express myself, but of all except the few exceptional. Of course, except that through this writing, I'm trying to do just that. Truly, I don't know if I'll have the impetus to publish these thoughts, but I desperately want to. This is my way of breaking through the mirror, as anyone listening to this has no physical representation of me. I am not obliged by society to interact with you, and there are clear boundaries to this relationship. It is pure expression. It is freedom. Here I can control my narrative, while being true. There needs be no boundary between thought and action to pass, if there is only thought. Perhaps a major reason that I love books so much is that I'm just an observer at my simplest. And although people assume otherwise, I'm not completely human adverse. Reading allows me to be privy to thoughts and actions without my own person being observed, acknowledged, or seen. It's genuinely perfect since, although I try to help it, I'm a naturally curious and nosy person, but my harrowing social skills are a barrier to exploring people firsthand. There are many times when I wish I could just be an untethered soul drifting across space and time, invisible and just able to observe the dire course of humanity, and not part of it, like a book's omniscient narrator. But when I feel less optimistic, I also wish that I might just be a brain hooked onto a machine to read books for all eternity. Because I genuinely can read books indefinitely. My brain does not get fatigued, but my body does. Even though it does nothing, it still gets all worked up, like me in a social situation. But I'm grateful for my body because despite all this, I do want to live. I would rather be living than dying, coward that I am. But life has a way of leading you on with small happinesses, and for me, that's enough to justify living. I'm hoping one day I'll stop hating myself around other people, that I'll have figured out translating thoughts into action, even if I can only be truly comfortable with one person. I've broadcast these thoughts, ironically, in the hope of reaching other people. Ultimately, we long for understanding. This video is perhaps just a shout into the abyss, but I hope my words might echo in someone else's mind. Then perhaps one of you have understood this part of me. And I you.